We're excited tonight to dig into this conversation with our three panelists and just dig into what it means to be a woman of faith in the marketplace. You all have achieved great success in the work that you do, and we're excited for this. This is not a big crowd, as Matt said, and so these water bottles don't stand up. They just roll everywhere, so I apologize. Let's try to be professional and helpful and make sure you say hi. Now I'm rolling towards the front awkwardly. They do roll. Hang on tight. It doesn't need to be a more formal panel, and so folks in the crowd, if you have questions as we're diving in, raise your hand, ask. This can be really a conversation. It doesn't need to be just me asking questions up front. So please don't hesitate if something's brought up or you want to know something from a particular panelist or just generally, please speak up. But to start off, I'd love for everybody to introduce themselves. I trust you give your best introduction, and then we can jump into questions from there.
I'll start. Hello, everyone. My name is Shantae Connolly. I am 37 years old, married for 12 years. I have two little kids, a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. The 6-year-old is the boss of the family. She bosses my life, my husband's life, and my son's life. I'm sure those who have kids know about the young little ones. Yes. I graduated from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana in marketing. Illini? All right. I worked in corporate America for around 14 years, and throughout that time, I was laid off. I realized that I cannot have one position ever hold my livelihood in their hands as far as financially concerning. So I decided to diversify my portfolio and to start doing other things. I started producing concerts and comedy shows on the side as I worked Monday through Friday in a full-time position. So I would take my vacation days and I would go and produce shows on my vacation days. That turned into a full-time thing, and I eventually left corporate America with the help of my pastor, Pastor Charlie Dates at Progressive Baptist Church. I have to give him a shout out. With the help of him, I decided to leave my full-time position and serve as the CEO and founder of Agency Brand You. We do event marketing for corporations, and I have a strong following or strong clientele in the hair and beauty space. That was a lot, but now you know my life.
Sonia Singh. I've lived in Chicago for about 11 years. Moved here from upstate New York, where I went to grad school at Syracuse. But I grew up in India. Let's see. I've recently transitioned in the last year to a new role, but I spent the last 14 years or so in consulting, mostly management strategy consulting, so working with large corporations around the country on business strategy, growth strategy, M&A type of things. I have an engineering degree, actually, a technology engineering. Didn't really work as an engineer. I love this problem-solving part of engineering, but didn't really like just sitting behind a desk and coding. So I quickly moved careers. Right now I work for a health innovation startup. So we work with some of the biggest health systems across the country, helping them innovate and build a better caregiving experience for both consumers and the doctors as well.
Awesome. So I'm Sally Wagonmaker, and just delighted to be here. I've known Tanya for quite a while, and Mary, I think, a little fresher. Barnabas is a fantastic organization, and I'm delighted to know about Pro 22. So I'm an attorney, and sometimes I go places where they're just chock full of attorneys, and that's rather boring. So this is kind of exciting. Well, it's always good to have wherever Wes is. Oh, there you go. So I had a law firm called Wagonmaker & Oberle, and we're here in Chicago. We also have an office in Charleston. I'm kind of a reluctant entrepreneur in some ways. I went to law school kind of blind and thought I wanted to do legal aid, and I actually did some legal aid and never thought I wanted to be entrepreneurial. And I think one of the things that I've learned is God uses everything in your life for His good as you love Him. And so I think a lot of my entrepreneurship came from waitressing days. So I encourage my children to go work in food. So our firm mostly works for not-for-profit organizations, and we have that focus, and that's really a delight and a privilege. A lot of faith-based organizations Thankful for my marriage, and just a little, I guess, preview or just information. I was out of the workforce about 5 to 7 years, depending on how you slice it, and that was a very pivotal time for me growing spiritually, and God's teaching me a lot of lessons. And then my babies are 18 and 20 now. And so, fun fact, my husband is a Michigan grad, and I have one at Michigan State and one at Ohio State.
Awesome. Well, Matt, you opened this up talking about this idea of calling and being called to the marketplace. I'd love to open up to one of you just to talk about calling. Like, was there a time where you really felt like this is a very clear path? It sounds like not exactly for any of us, any of you. But sort of how have you come to understand God's calling for you professionally? If you could speak a bit about that.
I'd love to jump in. Two things in particular. One is when I did legal aid, I felt a very strong calling to that. We live on the west side of Chicago, and I was miserable in my big corporate law firm job, and it was just very unmistakable. And so I was very thankful for that. But it comes at a price, because for one, I was miserable, and so that gave me the nerve to like jump out. And the other was it was very sacrificial financially, not long term, but just that God uses everything, and so that calling was unmistakable. A lot of times it's not. It's subtle, or you sit around, well, what am I going to do? And you take the next logical step for what the Lord has called you to do. One of the hats that I wear is I'm newly president of Christian Legal Society, which is a wonderful organization, grassroots for lawyers, law students, religious liberty, and legal aid, and kind of resisted that for a while, and it's a 2-year stint, but it's just been really a joy and a privilege. But it's a lot of work, and so it's a good thing that God says, I've called you to that, and with discernment from other people, because it's certainly nothing to aspire to. And sometimes I say, well, I was on the board for long enough, they just finally, said, all right. That's my little take.
The question again.
So this idea of calling, that God's really called you to a specific role, this specific line of work. How did you sort of come to understand it? Do you understand it? Do you feel like you're in the right spot that God's called you, or are you just sort of taking these next steps? But I just love this idea of calling, and I think it feels kind of mysterious and big to some of us that you're supposed to have a light where it's like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor in Africa, or...
I don't think I have that calling. I'm still trying. I'm seeking the Lord to give me exactly what He wants me to do. I think everything, and a young lady by the name of Na, we had a conversation earlier that it's all about the season, and I think I have a calling per season in my life, and so I've just been really trying to focus on what He wants me to do in that particular time frame of my life. And I believe that it's all going to come together, and I'm going to understand what He truly has for me or wants from me once we look back. I say, when I look back over my life and I think things over, I can truly say that I've been blessed. I have a testimony, and I think that's what is going to be more for me. So I can't say that I actually have a calling or that I know my calling right at this moment, to be frank.
No, that's perfect. That's great answer. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think I've always struggled with the same thing of like calling meant you had to like leave your corporate job and go out and be a missionary or whatever that looks like. I've always felt a call from God, like very early on, being like, Sonia, you have a spiritual inheritance on you. And I've seen generations of my parents, grandparents, like be like true followers of Jesus, but I never felt this thing of like I need to, forego my education, and go leave and do it. And I struggled with that a while. Like I tried doing short-term mission trips. I've been to Africa a few times. I'm like to just test it out. Like, is this for me? Because I felt it so strong. And then I think what I'm coming to learn and realize is God has put gifts in me that are actually serving the corporate world really well. I do that really well. I am successful in what I'm able to do, and I don't think that's for naught, right? So I think that was purposely placed in me by God. I do think God has blessed work, and so I think about my calling and the influence I have in this system. Right, so whether that's ethical decisions, how do people and companies make, because that's where I worked in consulting, is how do you influence that with the insight and wisdom that God has given me, that may be different than others. And also just being, I think we need more faith, like Jesus followers in the workplace.
Yes.
And if everyone's out in the field, like what happens to corporate America, right? And I think we have such a, so the calling is to influence society at large, is the way I think about it.
Yeah. So you brought up this idea of influence. If you have another specific example, I'd love to hear from you or Sally or Shantae, but how has your faith influenced your work? Either the way you think about your day in, day out job, or a particular example where you've really said, like, man, as a Christ follower, this is how I need to act. How has your belief in the Lord influenced the way that you are working as a professional in your line of work?
I let him lead. To quite frankly say that I let him lead. When I was in college, I used this Bible verse. I was the editor-in-chief of a yearbook, and it said, "In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path." And I think my faith is me aggressively praying for what I want, but also for what he sees for me. And whatever happens from that, I take it as that is the Lord guiding me to where I need to go. So I don't take any challenges personally. I don't take any hardships personally. I thank the Lord for blessing me for where I am, and I just keep living. And so it's released the stress, and we talked about this earlier, but it's released the stress of me knowing that I am in control of my life, because I'm not. God is. So I do everything right. I set goals. I'm aggressive at my work, and I talk to different people, and I sell myself. But at the end of the day, when I lay down to go to sleep, I go to sleep peacefully, because I know that all that I did today had nothing to do with me, that the Lord was going to do what he saw from me anyhow. And I've been happy in my career because of that.
Somebody write that down, not taking hardships or challenges personally. I mean, what freedom there is to work and pursue excellence when you're not taking it personally, but trusting the Lord to guide your steps. I love that.
How about you, Sally? How's faith influence?
Yeah, either a specific example where you've really had to say to yourself, gosh, as a Christ follower, I need to act in this way or not act in this way, or just more broadly, which you spoke to a little bit conceptually about how you view your role in America and the work that you do as a follower of Christ.
I think I used to think about it kind of naively. I think I'm getting more and more challenged by it every year. I used to think about it like, just make better decisions and speak truth to power and those sort of things. But even this week, I've been thinking about the story where Jesus washes the feet of disciples, and like the true act of servanthood and deconstructing social hierarchy. Like, Jesus, is that what you want me to do? Do you want me to embody this servanthood in corporate America? And that's like opposite to everything that corporate America tells you, beat your chest, go for how do you want me to do? And so those are the things that I think are challenging me now. I do think it's influenced the way I make decisions, but I feel like God is taking me to deeper and deeper levels of your faith, and these kingdom principles are very different than the world's principles. And that's where I'm navigating every day of what does this really look like to love everyone always, to have this attitude of humility and servitude, which is because everyone tells me I'm not going to be rewarded for that, because that's what the corporate America advice is no, you so I think that's how it's right now changing me.
Yeah. I'd love to jump in. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very different. And I think all of you have your own story to tell with that too. So it's a privilege to share. I think it makes me think of two things. One, when I first started practicing law, people knew I was a Christian because I didn't swear. And I was people knew not to swear around me. We're getting somewhere. And, I was pretty baby in my faith too, so maybe that was kind of for the best. But it showed me that people are watching all the time, and they react to you in a certain way because you are a Christian, because they perceive you. And now the work that I do, particularly because I work with mostly faith-based organizations, every day, am I going to pray with my clients? Am I going to pray before we have, client interactions? And how can I really be transformational and not just transactional, right? If you have clients or whatever your work is, okay, you're going to pay me to do this and I'm going to deliver these goods. Or you're going to come to me with your dreams and aspirations, and in some sense you're probably going to come because you have something nuts and bolts to take care of, but how can we be transformational in what we do and how we pray through that? Not only that, but when, there's a lot of cultural interesting stuff going on, so if you're going to be known as a Christian, what does that mean, and are you willing to take some of that kind of heat for that, depending on how people perceive you. So I think those are some key ways to kind of be infused by your faith and to live that out.
Anybody have any questions at this point?
Yeah, I'd be curious as to hear if you were to ask, I guess I'm asking that question. Okay, what is one of the greatest challenges you've had as a woman of faith in the marketplace, and how have you addressed that? One of the greatest challenges of being a woman of faith in the marketplace, and how have you addressed that?
For me, it's a woman of faith, and it's in the industry that I'm in, because I'm in the social media world, the socialite world, it's the clubbing and the drinking and, all of that is around me. And it's, do I adapt to my environment to grow my business further, or do I stay strong to my worth, to my ethics and my morals, and decide that all business is not good business for me? And that's what ultimately I had to decide to do. I have to choose not to go to certain things, and I'm not going to say everything is a bad thing, in the industry, but it's certain things and certain people that I have to stay away from in order to stay close to what I believe in and my morals. And the challenging part for me was, do I go money? Do you want success? Do you want this business? Or are you gonna stay, you're gonna hold your values? And so I chose morally to do what I felt morally was correct. And it's definitely a challenge. It's an everyday challenge, so it's not one particular one challenge for me. It's an everyday challenge for me in my business.
It's a great question. I'd love to jump in with two things. One is I think I'm the older one on the panel. You said your age, but I won't. But I do remember starting out. The very first job I ever had was with a judge, and the secretary was quite bitter that she had not gone to law school or that she did not have those kind of opportunities. So she treated all the law clerks horribly, so horribly that I had a 2-year clerkship. And so the first year it was her avowed purpose of life. It was to make the law clerks as miserable as possible. Then you get past the first year, and then you're golden. Literally, it was a switch. And so it's not per se as a woman of faith, but it's interesting because I think generally speaking, maybe not so much today as it was before, but this sense of, men generally go and have their careers and then they go on, not necessarily being a stay-at-home dad, although that could be a great thing, and women can kind of come and go, and you never quite know who you're going to get. Are you going to get somebody who was like that, who's kind of like, I never got a chance like you got, or I had a coworker who was a single mom, and she just had a very serious chip on her shoulder, and it wasn't until she actually got kind of inebriated at the office party, which is interesting, and she leans over to me, she goes, I've been so mean to you. Like, okay, Lord, I prayed through that. Like, how can I be kind to her no matter how rude she is to me? And I wasn't always the best, but when she had that moment, I was like, thank you, Lord, for alcohol. She finally told me, so there's, but I think there's some dynamics, gender-wise and all that. And I guess the last one I would point out is, which I think is just kind of a general rule, is just being very careful and being above reproach in how you relate, because you have a lunch with somebody of the opposite sex, I'm in a closed door meeting or something like that, but especially in our law firm, we try to be really, really sensitive to that. I have 2 male partners, and just to hold everything in very high regard. We try to really invest. I think I learned early on taking the high road and just being really careful of getting to know somebody else's spouse, really honoring the marriage relationship and avoiding, the Bible says flee from temptation. So being kind of honest about that, and then doing doing things that are above what society might say is appropriate, because it's so precious, and I think that's where Satan really works to undermine people, is through marital infidelity and then sexual misconduct.
So an example that comes to mind as far as challenge for you?
I think you covered a lot of it. It's really hard to there's so much to unpack, because there are challenges as a woman in the marketplace, and there's the challenge as a person of faith. I think you covered a lot of those different aspects together. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to add.
You'll be first on the next one.
Anybody else have any questions in the room?
Mary, let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Ladies, talk about failure, whether, especially in your career, as you look back at decision you made, a bad client that you made, that you said, man, when I first said yes to that client or started working at that job, it was good. And then it just didn't turn out well. Talk about a mistake that you've learned in terms of in your career that really has shaped you in terms of your thinking of who you are as a person.
Okay, I'll go.
How fast can we think of failure?
I don't know if it's like one example, but it's more, I think, a series of things that led to failure. So I think I think God taught me so much through this. My last career in consulting was partner path. Had to it's like, these are the things you need to do to get to partner. And I just, at some point, was just following that, just like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then, and I hadn't realized how much of my identity was starting to get tied to a title, a position, a status, if you will, within the company. And I had to reach a point where, for some reason, my book of business just dried up or got delayed. And then it led to a lot of questions around, is Sonia really up for a partner? Suddenly, I was on a great track, and then just had a dry spell, and it was just, and it's not, I think it's a little bit of failure in the sense that, I don't know if it's failure or it's just a circumstance where I felt like I failed. But I think it was, it was super painful. But in retrospect, I think the thing that God was really teasing out of me was, Sonia, your identity is so tightly tied to this job, to this company, to this label. And I really had to, God had to take it away in the form of a failure, because I'm kind of wired to be like achiever, this, that, and tie that to my self-worth. So I see that as a place where through last year, several months of really painful, and God had to really take me out of that. Your worth, Sonia, is tied to what I have done in you, and what I have done for you. It's not about this company. The company may fail to it's not about that. But that's an example of, I would say, where I felt I failed, but that's how God shaped me through that.
Would you like to share?
Sally, I'm gonna let you go first.
I have a story I've told many times, but I love it. It goes back to my beloved Christian Legal Society. So I was doing legal aid 20-something years ago, and there was this church conflict, and I think there was some sort of misconduct. And so, the bad pastor was really, really bad, and of course I represented the really good pastor, and so we were getting, clashing. And an attorney's quintessential role is to be a buffer, to be an advocate for their client, right? And so I was a little bit too invested in this, and not really, as objective as I could have been. Plus, I was, back to your question, Bill, I was trying to find my voice as a woman. And so, men, they're like, they have their deeper voice or whatever. So I thought, okay, I'm not really one to, I'm kind of a gentle person, or I don't know, I'm just not one of these people that blusters up. So I was like, okay, I have to put on this affect, So my affect was quite shrill and quite offensive, frankly. And I was so, concerned for my client. So I'm in this confrontation with this other lawyer, and I was like, your client did all these terrible things, and I'm being very brash, and I'm being a good lawyer because I'm so upset for my client. And he, took that very poorly, and we basically didn't get anywhere because we weren't trying to be conciliatory. I wasn't a buffer. It was a terrible interaction. I don't even know what happened with maybe we just drew our swords and parted ways, and I can't remember how that all eventually unfolded. But I was kind of embarrassed afterwards, and it was a failure. And I thought, that really wasn't the greatest. I wasn't really living out Christ. I just needed to put on this affect to try to be effective. And so fast forward, I was like, well, that's, good, because Chicago is a big city. I'm never going to see that lawyer again. It's kind of embarrassing. I don't really want to do that again. I kind of, learn, I think, like this, use the way that God wired you, and that's the best way to be effective, and to hone that and all that and grow in that. So anyway, so fast forward, so I go to my first Christian Legal Society conference, like in 1996, and so I was really excited. I was doing legal aid. I'm holy because I'm doing all these good things, and I'm sitting there in this room, and there's that guy. And I'm like, really? But I think it's logical because he's a Christian. And so I was like, okay, well, as soon as this is over, I'm still not talking to that guy. So as soon as, it's one of those big rooms, like there's hundreds of people. I'm like, he's no way going to find me. So after he just hightails it for me, and he comes over and he accosts me. So I said, we go turn you. And he says, what you did was wrong. Wow. And I'm here to tell you that because I care about you as a Christian. Wow. And because I intend to be in community with you for a long time.
Wow.
And we're now on the board of Christian Legal Society together. Yeah, many, many years later, he's new. But yeah, it was just taught me, like, out of that extreme failure that, God is always watching and working, and he restores us. And I think as where are you? Yeah, you were talking about finding mentors, and you were saying how it's maybe hard. Sometimes they're just right in your face. So take it, whether somebody's rebuking you or encouraging, or maybe both at the same time.
I think we have time for one more question. I have one unless somebody else in the audience has one they want to ask. Oh, okay.
I was going to say, it sounds like all of you are really successful in what you do. I wanted to know, I guess it kind of connects with Barnabas' mission, is like how have you been able to give back, or what avenues in the city have you found a way to give back with the talents you have? I'm just curious to know.
You get to go first.
You have all the great answers. I work a lot with my church family. And a project that ties into what I do and what I did with my church is we created a carnival. We put a carnival in the middle of a projects for Chicago public housing projects for Back to School Fest. All you have to do is come to the tent and allow us to pray for you. And if you allowed us to pray for you, then you could enter in, and you got backpacks and school supplies, and you got on all the rides, and we had food, and we had everything. And I think that type of stuff is what truly makes my heart happy. It's just helping others. And so I think that's one of the things that I've done that's tied into what I do professionally. But I've done many outside of that.
I'll share.
I think it's a couple of different things. I too lead a ministry at church called Faith and Work. So really thinking about, because we have so many people in church who spend most of their waking hours working, right? And then so we call it bridging the gap between Sunday and Monday. Great Sunday service, you're feeling great, and then Monday you're back to the same habits, the same routine. So I actually write a devotional every week that goes out to hundreds of people who are part of it. We do a lot of different events, really helping people work through that, those examples of like, oh, this great story in John, how does it apply to my day-to-day work life? So really, I think that's one of the, I would say several, but yeah.
Yeah, I think just to bring it back to the beginning with the question about calling, because I do think there's these different seasons and kind of where God's put you. So connect, like specifics, I mean, there's umpteen things to do. Where does God meet you in your heart? Where are you excited? I sorted shoes once at the thrift store for our kids' Christian school. Please don't make me do that again. Like, it was okay. But, and then there's callings. There's the changing diapers calling. There's the, or being I did a mom's ministry many years ago, and that's like it's kind of a different season of my life. Like I could do that, and I remember once where there was this big retreat going on, and I so desperately wanted to go, but we were really short on work, and so I texted the guy who was encouraging me to go, and I said, it's like 11 o'clock on Friday night, woes me, and I said, I'm working all these projects, I'm getting all these projects out. And he's like, bless you, just bless you. I was like, I'm just trying to get till we can hire somebody else. And not that that's like the most special thing in the world, but like that was my calling, and that's how I'm giving back so that we can hire, and that's, we may not directly, but there is that element of calling. It's not like, okay, there's only like one thing you can do, but like give back, and if you're excited about it, great, and being connected, we're so disconnected, and like is your, do you have meaning in your work? How can you find meaning in your work? How can you find meaning in engagement? Years ago we had no money to give. Now we have more money to give. Well, maybe that's part of my calling is to give money, or my calling is to be about, like I do a lot of like second tier stuff. We represent organizations that are out there doing all these amazing things, and my calling is to help them with their bylaws, and then we do, okay, is this recording? We do some pro bono work. And that's part of my calling, but am I willing to pitch in and do other things, wash the dishes or be a servant or to be there for my family or something like that. So I think keeping that all in mind, like, are you the super duper volunteer but really are not doing it for the right reason? Are you at work all the time and like, no, I can't be bothered? Like, there's no magic formula to that, but where is God calling you? Because your number one calling is to follow Christ, right, and to be His child. And when you acknowledge that and say, I am your child, and then if you can't think of anything to do, well, then do the next logical thing, because chances are that's going to be kind of diagnostic.
Thank you so much. We're out of time, so everybody just join me in giving.